Act 1. The Dream House. There is a certain kind of street that exists in the heart of the American dream. Wide, leafy avenues, lined with grand, historic homes, where children ride bicycles on the sidewalk and neighbors wave from manicured lawns. It's a vision of safety, prosperity, and idyllic family life. Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey, was exactly that kind of street. It was ranked as one of the safest and most desirable places to live in the entire country. And in June of 2014, for Derek and Maria Broaddus, it was the place where their dream was about to come true. Derek and Maria were a hard-working, successful couple with 3 young children. They had spent years saving up, dreaming of the perfect home to raise their family. And they found it at 657 Boulevard. It was a beautiful 6-bedroom Dutch colonial home, built in 1905, with a sprawling backyard and a sense of history and permanence. It was more than just a house. It was the culmination of everything they had worked for. After a competitive bidding process, they bought their dream home for $1.35 million. They didn't move in right away. The house, while beautiful, needed some renovations to make it their own. For the first few days, the property was a place of happy excitement. Derek, who worked as a senior vice president at an insurance company, would spend his days in the city and then come to the house in the evenings to paint and supervise the contractors. Their children, aged 5, 8, and 10, would run through the empty rooms, planning where their bedrooms would be and dreaming of the games they would play in the big backyard. It was on one of these early evenings, just 3 days after closing on the house, that Derek went to check the mail. Tucked amongst the bills and junk mail was a single, plain white envelope. There was no return address. In thick, clunky handwriting, it was addressed simply to the new owner. Derek sat down on the floor of his new, empty house, a house filled with the promise of a happy future, and opened the letter. The first few lines sounded friendly, if a little eccentric. "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard," it began. "Allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." But any sense of welcome quickly curdled into something deeply unsettling. The writer claimed that the house had been the subject of my family for decades now. They wrote, "My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out." The letter grew more personal and more sinister. The writer mentioned the renovations, asking, "Have they found what is in the walls yet?" And then came the first mention of the Broaddus children, the detail that would turn their dream into a nightmare. "You have children. I have seen them. So far I think there are 3 that I have counted." The letter ended with a chilling, open-ended threat. "Who am I? I am the Watcher." Derek's blood ran cold. This was not a welcome note. This was a violation, a declaration of ownership from an unseen entity who was already intimately familiar with his family. He raced back to his old home and showed the letter to Maria. The dream had been shattered. That night, they contacted the police. The nightmare at 657 Boulevard had just begun. Act 2. The Young Blood. The first letter was terrifying, but the Broaddus family hoped it was a one-time event, perhaps a twisted prank by a jealous neighbor who had lost the bidding war for the house. The police advised them not to tell anyone about the letter, fearing it would compromise their investigation. Derek and Maria paused all renovation work and stopped bringing their children to the house. The place that was meant to be their sanctuary had become a source of profound fear. 2 weeks later, a second letter arrived. It was even more detailed, more personal, and far more frightening than the first. The watcher now seemed to know them intimately. The letter addressed Derek and Maria by their names, though it was misspelled as Mr. and Mrs. Broaddus. This time, the focus was almost entirely on their children. The watcher seemed to know their birth order, and even their nicknames. The letter read, "I am pleased to know your names now, and the name of the young blood you have brought to me." The tone became possessive and predatory. Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. The watcher's claimed connection to the house became more elaborate and almost supernatural. The house is crying from the pain of the new and old. It is begging for the young blood to return to it. You have changed it and made it so fancy. It is a bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. The letter revealed that the writer wasn't just watching from afar. They claimed to be intimately close, perhaps even inside the house itself. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now you are too, Broaddus family. The family was plunged into a state of constant, unbearable paranoia. Every car that drove by too slowly, every neighbor who glanced at their property, every creak in their old home became a potential threat. They were being stalked by a ghost, an invisible enemy who knew the names of their children. The dream of moving into 657 Boulevard was dead. The only goal now was to survive. They hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent, who began to scrutinize every neighbor and every person who had worked on the house. They installed a sophisticated alarm system and webcams, but the letters kept coming. The third letter arrived a few weeks later. "Where have you gone to?" the watcher demanded. 657 Boulevard is missing you. This letter was the most direct threat yet, a clear sign that the writer's obsession was escalating. The dream home now sat empty, a monument to a family's terror, held captive by an author of poison pen letters. Act 3. A neighborhood of suspects. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation into the identity of the watcher became an all-consuming obsession for the Broaddus family, turning their quiet, upscale neighborhood into a web of suspicion and paranoia. The initial police investigation had stalled. There were no fingerprints on the letters, no DNA evidence, and no digital trail to follow. The watcher was a ghost. The private investigator hired by the family began to dig into the lives of their new neighbors. The most obvious theory was that the watcher was someone close by, someone who could physically observe the family and drop the letters in their mailbox. Suddenly, the friendly faces of Boulevard were potential suspects. Suspicion first fell on the Langford family, who had lived next door for decades. The family was somewhat eccentric, and their house was positioned in a way that gave them a clear view of 657 Boulevard. One of the adult children, Michael Langford, who lived at home, had a history of mental illness, which made him an early person of interest. He was questioned by police, but denied any involvement. And with no evidence to link him, the suspicion remained just that, a suspicion. Another theory pointed to a man who had been in a relationship with someone who lived just a few houses down. His hobby? Playing a dark video game where his character was named the Watcher. It was a tantalizing clue, and he was questioned twice by police. He even agreed to an interview with the family's private investigator, but again, Nothing concrete could be proven. The Broaddus family, desperate for answers, launched their own investigation. They spent countless hours online, searching for anyone who might hold a grudge. They staked out their own property, hiding in the dark and watching their own home, hoping to catch the person who was watching them. They even hired a forensic linguist to analyze the letter's writing style. The linguist suggested the writer was older, a voracious reader, but offered no definitive clues. One of the most compelling and strangest theories came from a former resident of Westfield. They suggested that the Broaddus family look into a man who lived in the neighborhood years ago. A man whose family was known for being odd. This man, they claimed, would sit on his lawn in a lawn chair, facing 657 Boulevard, and just watch it. The investigation even looked back at the previous owners of the house, the Woods family. When contacted, the Woods family admitted that they, too, had received a single, strange letter from the watcher just days before they moved out. But they had dismissed it as a prank and thrown it away without much thought. They had lived in the house for 23 years without any other incidents. Was the watcher a real, long-term stalker of the house? Or was it someone new, perhaps a disgruntled former employee of the new owners? Or a neighbor angered by the noise of the renovations? The pool of suspects was wide, but the evidence was non-existent. Every lead led to a dead end. The watcher remained a phantom, a faceless tormentor who had successfully turned a peaceful, trusting neighborhood against itself. Act 4. The Ruin. The invisible terror of the watcher inflicted very real and devastating consequences on the Broaddus family. Their dream home had become an unholy burden, a financial and emotional black hole that was consuming their lives. For 6 months, they continued to pay the mortgage and property taxes on a house they were too terrified to live in. The financial strain was immense, but the psychological toll was even greater. The constant fear and paranoia were relentless. Maria had nightmares. Derek, consumed by the need to protect his family, found himself in a state of hypervigilance, unable to trust anyone. The joy and excitement they had felt just a few months earlier had been replaced by a gnawing anxiety that permeated every aspect of their lives. Their relationship was strained, and they were haunted by the question of whether they had made a terrible mistake that had endangered their children. Finally, they made a difficult decision. They had to sell the house. They put 657 Boulevard back on the market. But this time, they had a moral and legal obligation to disclose the existence of the watcher letters to any potential buyers. The story of the stalking, once a private horror, was about to become public knowledge. As expected, the disclosure was a death sentence for the property's value. No one wanted to buy a house that came with its own personal stalker. The story was picked up by the local news, and then it went national. The Watcher house became infamous. The family was forced to lower the asking price again and again. But the house sat on the market, a pariah. Desperate, the Broaddus family came up with a new plan. They would sell the house to a developer who would tear it down and subdivide the property into 2 smaller lots. It was a last-ditch effort to recoup some of their financial losses. But even this was met with resistance. The Westfield Planning Board, under pressure from neighbors who didn't want the character of their historic street changed, denied their proposal. The family was trapped. They couldn't live in the house, they couldn't sell it, and they couldn't tear it down. They even tried to sue the previous owners, the Woods family, for not disclosing the single letter they had received. The lawsuit was ugly and public, and it only added to their misery. The case was eventually dismissed. During this time, a fourth and final letter arrived. It was the most venomous of all. The Watcher taunted them for their attempts to sell the house and for the public attention the case had received. 657 Boulevard is turning on you, the letter sneered. It will be your fault when it is over. The family was broken. They had lost their life savings, their peace of mind, and their faith in the safety of the world. The Watcher, through the simple act of writing a few anonymous letters, had achieved a campaign of psychological terror that was devastatingly effective. Act 5. The Unseen Enemy. In 2019, 5 years after their ordeal began, Derek and Maria Broaddus finally sold 657 Boulevard at a significant financial loss. They sold it to a new family who, despite knowing the house's history, was willing to take the risk. As far as is publicly known, the new family has not received any letters. So, who was the Watcher? The mystery remains unsolved, and the theories are as varied as they are unsettling. Theory 1. The Neighbor. This is the most logical and widely believed theory. The Watcher was likely a neighbor who lived close by, someone with a clear line of sight to the house. The letters contain details that only a close observer would know. The motive could have been anything from a mental illness, to a resentment of the Broaddus family's wealth, to a deep-seated, possessive obsession with the house itself. The Langford family, particularly Michael, remains a popular, though unproven, suspect. Theory 2. The prank gone wrong. Some believe it all started as a prank, perhaps by a group of teenagers or a disgruntled competitor. The goal might have been simply to scare the new owners, but the prank took on a life of its own, escalating as the family's fear became more public and palpable. Theory 3. The Broaddus family faked it. This is the most cynical theory, but one that inevitably arises in cases like this. Some have suggested that the family, suffering from buyer's remorse after paying a high price for the house, invented the story of the Watcher to get out of the sale and recoup their money through a lawsuit or a movie deal. However, there is no evidence to support this, and the immense financial loss and emotional suffering the family endured make this theory seem highly improbable. Theory 4. The real estate competitor. A more recent theory, proposed by some investigators, is that the letters were a sophisticated form of competitor stalking. The idea is that another potential buyer who lost the bidding war for the house sent the letters to scare the Broaddus family away, hoping to then buy the property themselves at a lower price. The story of the Watcher house is a uniquely modern kind of horror story. It contains no violence, no ghosts, no jump scares. The terror is entirely psychological, born from the violation of privacy and the fear of the unknown. It proves that the most terrifying monsters are not those that hide in the dark, but those that hide in plain sight, perhaps behind a neighbor's friendly smile. The letters stopped, but the identity of the Watcher remains a ghost, a phantom who, with just a pen and paper, successfully destroyed a family's American dream and left a permanent scar on a quiet,